I said it in front of the entire court. "Father, I will never choose a human." I said it loudly, proudly, with my chin high and my voice ringing off the crystal pillars of the Hall of Accord, because I wanted everyone to hear it, especially the human envoy standing there at the foot of my father's dais, and I wanted it to wound him, and I believe it did. I have spent the years since wishing I could take those words back, not because they were impolitic, though they were. Because they were cruel, and because they were wrong, and because the human they were aimed at turned out to be the finest person I have ever known, and I greeted him with an insult in front of 1,000 witnesses, and he forgave me for it before I had even begun to deserve forgiveness, and that grace, offered to someone who had just publicly despised him, was the first crack in everything I believed about humans and about myself. My name is Vaelis. I was, in those days, the crown princess of the Aurelian Ascendancy, heir to a throne older than most of the stars you can see from your world, and I was very proud, and very certain, and very wrong about a great many things. This is the story of how a human unmade my certainty, and of how everything changed, and it did change, all of it, exactly as the tellers say, though not in the way anyone expected, least of all me. Let me start at the beginning. Let me tell you why I said it, and why I was so sure, and what it cost me to learn better. You have to understand my people, the Aurelians, before you can understand my prejudice, because my prejudice was not personal. It was inherited. It was the air I breathed. The Aurelians were old and beautiful and proud beyond the telling of it. We were a people of grace and refinement, of art and ceremony and the long perfection of every gesture. Our cities were crystal and light. I wish you could have seen the capital, Ilveria, at dawn, when the sun came through the spire glass and threw rivers of color down the avenues, and the morning chimes rang from tower to tower in patterns that had been composed 10,000 years ago and never once played wrong. Our court was the most elegant in the known galaxy, a place where every word was chosen, every movement choreographed, every interaction a small, perfect performance of dignity. We had spent 10,000 years refining ourselves into something we believed was the highest form a thinking people could take: controlled, elegant, serene, never coarse, never loud, never common. Let me show you what that refinement actually meant, day to day, because the showing is the only way you'll understand the prison it was. An Aurelian did not laugh out loud. We had instead a small, precise gesture, a slight inclination of the head, a particular softening around the eyes that meant I am amused, and it was considered the height of vulgarity to make an actual sound of laughter. An Aurelian did not weep where others could see. Grief was performed in private, and in public reduced to a single permitted gesture, a hand laid briefly over the eyes. An Aurelian did not touch another Aurelian except in the most rigidly prescribed ceremonial ways. A parent might touch a child's brow at certain rites. A sovereign might extend 2 fingers to be touched by a supplicant. But the easy constant contact that warm peoples share, the embraces and the clasped hands and the hands laid on shoulders, these were unknown to us, unthinkable, the behavior of the unformed. We lived our whole lives, every one of us, inside an exquisite invisible cage of refinement, never quite touching, never quite laughing, never quite weeping, performing dignity at every moment from birth until death. We thought it was beautiful. I thought it was beautiful. And it was beautiful in the way a perfect crystal is beautiful, flawless, and cold, and a little dead. I did not know it was a little dead. You do not know the air is thin until you have breathed deeper air. I had never breathed deeper air. No Aurelian had, in 10,000 years. We had refined the deep breathing out of ourselves so long ago that we had forgotten it was ever possible, and we called the forgetting civilization, and we looked down on everyone who still remembered how to breathe. We looked down on humans most of all, because humans were everything we had spent 10,000 years teaching ourselves not to be. They were loud. They were coarse. They laughed too much and too easily, great barking laughs that shattered the careful serenity of any room they entered. They touched each other constantly, clasped hands, embraced, clapped shoulders, a whole vocabulary of physical contact that we found almost obscene. They said what they felt bluntly without the careful indirection that civilized discourse required. They were emotional, demonstrative, impulsive, messy, and to a people who had made a religion of refinement, humans were not merely different. They were an affront. They were everything we had risen above, walking around as if it were something to be proud of. I had been raised on this. Every Aurelian was. We were taught, gently and constantly, that the human way of being was a lower way, a cruder evolutionary stage, the behavior of a people who had not yet learned to govern themselves. We did not hate humans exactly. Hatred is too crude an emotion for an Aurelian. We disdained them. We found them faintly embarrassing, the way you find a loud child at an elegant gathering embarrassing, not malicious, just unformed, just less. And I, the crown princess, the supposed flower of all that Aurelian refinement, had absorbed the disdain more completely than anyone, because more than anyone I had been raised to embody the very thing humans were not. I should tell you about my father, because the proposal that started everything came from him, and because I misjudged him almost as badly as I misjudged Marcus. My father was the sovereign Aurelian, the light of the ascendancy, the most refined being in a civilization that worshipped refinement, and I thought, for most of my life, that he was exactly what he appeared to be, the perfect cold flower of our perfect cold people, serene and untouchable and a little inhuman. I loved him the way an Aurelian loves a parent, which is to say carefully, formally, across a distance of prescribed gestures. I did not think he felt things deeply. I did not think any of us did. That was rather the point. I was wrong about my father, the way I was wrong about everything in those days. Because my father, I would learn, had been watching our people decline for his entire reign, and had been grieving it privately in the Aurelian way, where no one could see, and had come to a terrible conclusion that no refined Aurelian sovereign should have been able to reach. He had concluded that the refinement was killing us. That 10,000 years of perfecting ourselves into cold, flawless crystal had made us, in the end, exactly what crystal is, beautiful and brittle and unable to grow. He looked at our declining birth rate, our shrinking territory, our exquisite, stagnant, changeless court, and he saw a people who had refined themselves to death, and he was the only Aurelian alive with the courage to name it, and he could not name it out loud, because to name it was to betray everything our people believed. So he did the only thing he could do. He could not tell our people they were dying of their own refinement, but he could bring something warm into the cold heart of the court at the highest possible level and let it do what argument never could. He could marry his heir to a human, not for the political alliance, though that was the reason he gave, the reason everyone understood. The real reason, the one he confessed to me only much later, was that he wanted warmth in the bloodline of the ascendancy. He wanted his grandchildren to be able to laugh out loud. He was trying to save our people by smuggling life back into them through the one door no one would think to guard, a marriage, a joining, a single human heart placed at the very center of the cold crystal court to thaw it from the inside. I did not know any of this when he proposed it. I thought he was being political and a little cruel. I said no in the cruelest way I could. And my father, who was trying, in the only way he could, to save us all, took my public insult of his secret hope, and said nothing, and bore it, because he could not explain, and because he had gambled everything on a human's character and could only wait to see if he had gambled right. He had, but I am getting ahead of myself. It was politics, of course. That is what I believed and what everyone believed. It is always politics for a crown princess. I had known since childhood that my eventual mate would be a matter of state, not of the heart. The Aurelian Ascendancy was ancient and refined and also, though we did not like to admit it, in slow decline, old and proud, and increasingly outmatched by younger, hungrier, faster rising powers. And humanity was the fastest rising of all, a young, vigorous people whose star was climbing as ours was slowly setting, and my father, who was wiser than I gave him credit for, had seen the shape of the future, and decided that the Ascendancy's survival might depend on an alliance with the rising human power. And the deepest, most binding alliance in the old Aurelian way was a marriage, a joining of houses. My father proposed that I, his heir, the crown princess, might choose a human mate, to bind the Ascendancy and humanity together at the highest level, to anchor our declining house to their rising one, to secure the future of our people through a union of blood. I was horrified. I want to be honest about the horror because it is shameful and it is the starting point of everything. I did not think this is a difficult political necessity I must consider with maturity. I thought they want me to bind myself to one of those loud, coarse, common creatures, to let one of them touch me, to spend my life beside something I have been raised to find beneath me. It was, to me, not a political question but a personal degradation. The flower of Aurelian refinement joined to a human. It was unthinkable. It was an insult to everything I was. I remember the night before the envoy was presented. I did not sleep. I walked the long crystal galleries of the palace alone, in the dark, with the starlight coming down through the spire glass, and I worked myself into a fury of wounded pride. I rehearsed what I would say. I crafted it the way an Aurelian crafts everything, choosing each word for maximum elegance and maximum cruelty. Because if I was to be humiliated by this proposal, then I would at least humiliate the human in return, would make him understand exactly how far beneath me he was, would perform my refusal so perfectly that the whole court would remember it, as the moment the crown princess defended the dignity of the Ascendancy against the coarse presumption of the rising apes. That is who I was, the night before I met Marcus Hale. I want you to see her clearly, that proud, cruel, certain young woman walking the dark galleries rehearsing her cruelty, because the whole story is about her undoing, and you cannot feel the undoing if you do not first see what there was to undo. His name was Marcus Hale. He was presented to me the next day in the hall of Accord before the whole assembled court. A deliberate setting, my father's choice, meant to honor the human and the proposed alliance both. The hall of Accord was the most beautiful room in the Ascendancy, a vast space of crystal and light where the great matters of state were performed, and it was packed that day. 1,000 Aurelian nobles in their pale, elegant robes, every one of them watching, because everyone knew what was being proposed, and everyone wanted to see how the crown princess would receive it. I saw him come in. My first impression was that he was solid. Humans are denser than Aurelians, more compact, more physical, and he moved through that ethereal crystal hall like something real among ghosts, his footsteps actually audible on the floor where ours made no sound. He was not handsome, by Aurelian standards. He was too solid, too marked by use, his face lined in a way that ours never were because we did not let ourselves make the expressions that line a face. But he moved well with an unhurried steadiness, and when he reached the foot of my father's dais he bowed, a human bow, deeper and less precise than ours, but somehow more sincere for being less perfect, and he waited calm to be received. And I drew myself up, and I raised my chin, and in front of 1,000 Aurelian nobles and the human envoy himself, I did the thing I am most ashamed of in my entire life. I said the words that the tellers have made the title of this story. Father, I will never choose a human. The hall went silent. Even by Aurelian standards, where silence was common, this was a different silence. The silence of 1,000 refined beings who had just watched their crown princess do something genuinely, shockingly rude in the most public possible setting, to an honored guest. I had broken our own code of refinement in the act of defending it. I had been more coarse in that moment than any human had ever been in that hall, and some dim part of me knew it even as the words rang off the crystal, and I did not care, because my pride was afire and the fire wanted to burn him. I should describe how he received my insult, because it is the first thing he ever taught me, though I did not understand the lesson for a long time. I had expected him to be wounded. I had wanted him to be wounded, That was the whole point of saying it publicly. And perhaps he was. I learned later that he was more than he showed. But he did not show it the way I expected. An Aurelian, so insulted before the court, would have responded with cold, elegant fury, with a perfectly composed riposte designed to wound in return, with the whole choreography of refined offense. Marcus did none of that. He stood there at the foot of my father's dais, this human envoy, having just been publicly despised by the woman he'd crossed the galaxy to court, and he simply absorbed it. He took it. I watched it land on him. I was close enough to see the small flinch, quickly mastered, the brief tightening around the eyes, and then I watched him decide in real time not to return it, not to play the game I had started. He inclined his head, not a deep bow, just a small respectful nod, and he said, in passable Aurelian, in a voice with no anger in it at all, "Then I won't ask you to, Your Highness. I'd never want to be anyone's burden. But I've come a long way, and your father has been kind enough to host me, so if it's all the same to you, I'll stay a while as your people's guest and try to be useful. And if you never choose me, that's your right, and I'll go home, and there'll be no hard feelings on my end. You don't owe me anything, least of all your hand." And then he smiled, a small, genuine, unbothered smile, the first human smile I had ever seen up close, and stepped back. And the matter was, as far as he was concerned, closed. I was furious. I want you to understand that my first reaction was fury, not the softening you might expect, because he had robbed me of my victory. I had insulted him publicly, and instead of giving me the satisfaction of a wounded reaction, he had simply declined to be wounded, had refused the whole game, had responded to my cruelty with a grace so complete that it made me look like the coarse one, the cruel one, the one who had behaved beneath her station. And in the Aurelian court, where every interaction was a performance of dignity, he had just, without raising his voice, made the crown princess look small in front of the entire assembly. It was the first time in my life that a human had bested me. He had done it by being kinder than I was, which I had been raised to believe was impossible, because I had been raised to believe that I was the refined one, and he was the crude one, and refined people do not get outgraced by crude ones. I went back to my chambers that night in a cold fury, and I could not understand why I was so angry, and it took me a long time to understand that I was angry because some part of me had already seen, in that small, unbothered smile, that I had been wrong about something, and I was not yet ready to know what. He stayed. My father insisted, and Marcus was willing, and so the human envoy took up residence at the Aurelian court, in the guest wing, to be, as he had said, useful, and to let me come to know him, even though I had sworn before the whole court that I never would. I avoided him. Of course I avoided him. I had made a public vow and my pride required me to keep it, and besides, I genuinely did not want to know him. I wanted him to fail, to give up, to go home, so that I would be proven right and my father would abandon this humiliating scheme. So for the first weeks I treated Marcus Hale as a piece of inconvenient furniture, present, unavoidable, but beneath my notice. I did not speak to him. I did not look at him. When court protocol forced us into proximity, I performed a perfect cold Aurelian distance, the whole elegant machinery of disdain, and I waited for him to be driven away by it. He was not driven away. That was the thing. And worse, far worse, for my pride, he did not even seem to be trying to win me over. He had heard my vow and taken it at face value. He was not courting me, not pursuing me, not performing the suitor's role I had braced to coldly reject. He had simply, as he'd said, set about being useful, and being useful turned out to be the most disarming thing he could possibly have done, because it meant I could not dismiss him as a desperate suitor, could not flatter myself that his presence was about me at all. He was just living among us, helping, being himself. And being himself, it turned out, was the thing that undid me. As the weeks passed, I began, against my will, despite myself, to notice him, because it is impossible to share a court with someone for weeks and not notice them, however much you have sworn not to. And what I noticed, slowly, reluctantly, with a growing and unwelcome confusion, was that the human envoy was not what I had been taught humans were. I want to give you the specific moments, because it was not an idea that changed my mind. Aurelians are very good at holding ideas. It was the moments, the small, undeniable human moments, that the idea could not stand against. There was the kitchen worker, an old Aurelian servant, one of the palace's many invisible ones, who dropped and shattered a serving vessel in a corridor, an ancient piece, valuable, and the old servant froze in terror, because in our court a servant who damaged something precious could expect cold consequences. And I watched from a gallery above as Marcus Hale, passing by, stopped, and instead of summoning a steward, instead of the cold correctness any Aurelian would have shown, he knelt down beside the terrified old servant and helped gather the shards, talking quietly the whole time, and I was close enough to hear him say, "Hey, it's all right. It's just a cup. You're worth more than a cup. Here, let me help, we'll get it sorted. No one needs to know it was anything but an accident." And he clapped the old servant gently on the shoulder, that human touch I had been raised to find obscene, and the old servant, who I am certain had not been touched with kindness in decades, in a court where no one touched anyone, simply broke down and wept, and Marcus stayed and let the old one weep, on the floor among the shards until it passed. And then he helped the servant up, and made some small human joke, and the old face that had been white with terror was, by the end, almost smiling. I had been raised to find that whole scene coarse. The kneeling, the touching, the tears in public unconcealed, every part of it violated our refinement. And I stood in the gallery above and watched it, and I felt something I had no name for, something that was almost like grief, because I realized that I had never once in my life seen anyone do what Marcus had just done, that in 10,000 years of perfect refinement, my people had never learned the thing that this coarse human did without thinking, to kneel beside a frightened person and tell them they were worth more than a cup. There were others. I began, despite myself, to collect them, the human moments, the small, undeniable proofs. He was loud, yes, but his loudness was warmth, not coarseness. The great barking laugh I had been raised to find vulgar turned out to make the servants smile, to put the nervous at ease, to fill the cold, elegant halls with something they had been missing for 10,000 years, so that I noticed, after a few weeks, that the parts of the palace where Marcus spent his time had become warmer, had begun to thaw, that the staff sought out the corridors he frequented, that a small island of human warmth had formed in the cold crystal court and was slowly, quietly spreading. He touched people, yes, but his touch was kindness. I watched him clasp the hand of a grieving kitchen worker, clap the shoulder of an anxious young guard, ruffle, actually ruffle, the head crest of a noble's child who had wandered lost and frightened into the wrong gallery. And I saw what those touches did, the comfort they carried, the loneliness they eased in a court where no one ever touched anyone and everyone was. I began to understand, achingly lonely beneath the perfect refinement. He said what he felt, bluntly, yes, but his bluntness was honesty, and in a court built entirely on careful indirection and elegant lies, his plain human honesty was like a clean wind through a closed room. I watched him, in a council session I attended coldly and silently, simply say the true thing that every refined Aurelian in the room was carefully talking around, name the actual problem plainly, without the 10 layers of elegant indirection that our discourse required. And I watched the council flinch at the rudeness of it, and then, slowly, realized that he had cut in one blunt human sentence to the heart of a matter they had been elegantly circling for an hour. And that the bluntness was not coarseness but clarity, the thing our refinement had refined away. Everything I had been taught was a flaw turned out on closer watching to be a different thing entirely, seen from a different angle. The loudness was warmth, the touching was kindness, the bluntness was honesty. The messiness was life, real, warm, demonstrative, unguarded life. the thing my own people had refined ourselves out of so completely that we had forgotten we ever had it. I had been raised to see humans as a lower form of my own kind. I began, in those weeks of unwilling watching, to suspect the terrible opposite, that humans were not a lower form of anything, that they simply had something my people had lost, and that the disdain I had been raised on was not the judgment of the high upon the low, but the resentment of the cold for the warm, the way the dying resent the living for being alive. I was not ready to believe it. I fought it. I clung to my prejudice and my public vow, because the vow was now a cage of my own building, and admitting I was wrong meant admitting I had been cruel before 1,000 witnesses to a man who had answered my cruelty with grace. My pride could not afford the truth. So I held the line coldly, even as the crack widened in me, even as I found myself, against all my will, watching for him in the corridors, listening for that warm barking laugh, feeling the cold crystal court grow colder in the rooms he was not in. And then everything changed, truly changed, all at once in a single night, when the thing happened that showed me, past all possibility of denial, exactly who Marcus Hale was and exactly how wrong I had been. It happened at the convocation of the 9 houses, which was the most important and most refined event in the Aurelian year, and that is part of why it mattered so much. Because the crisis struck at the very heart of our refinement, in the most ceremonial room in the Ascendancy, on the night when my people were most fully themselves, and it revealed, in a few terrible minutes, exactly what our refinement was worth when something real went wrong. Let me set it for you. The convocation was held in the Hall of Accord, the same crystal hall where I had spoken my cruel vow weeks before. Once a year, the heads of the 9 great houses of the Ascendancy gathered there with the sovereign, my father, for a night of ceremony so elaborate and so ancient that most of it had no meaning anyone living remembered. We performed it because we had always performed it, each gesture passed down across 10,000 years, the whole night a single, enormous, flawless dance of refinement. Hundreds attended. The most important Aurelians alive, in their finest pale robes, performing dignity at the highest pitch our civilization could reach. Marcus was there as my father's guest, seated at the edge of it all, present, watching, the one warm, solid human thing in a sea of cold crystal grace. I was near the center, beside my father in my place as heir. And I remember being, that night, particularly cold toward Marcus, performing my disdain extra carefully, because the crack in me had grown frightening and I was overcompensating, clinging to my refinement and my vow precisely because I could feel them slipping. I would not look at him. I was the perfect Aurelian princess that night, flawless and cold, and I was using the flawlessness as a wall against the thing growing in me, and I thought the wall was holding. And then the ceiling came down. I still do not know to this day whether it was an accident or an attack. The Ascendancy never determined it for certain, a structural failure in the ancient crystal vaulting, or sabotage by one of the rising powers who would have profited from the death of the sovereign and the 9 houses in a single night. It does not matter for this story. What matters is what happened in the hall. There was a sound, a deep, wrong, grinding sound, from high above, in the great crystal vault that arched over the whole hall, and then a crack, a real crack, not the silence we called by that name, but an actual splitting roar as a section of the ancient ceiling, tons of crystal and stone, gave way directly above the center of the convocation, above my father, above the gathered heads of the 9 houses, above me. And here is the thing I have to tell you, the thing that is the whole heart of this part, the thing that shames my people and that I have never been able to forget. The Aurelians froze. All of them, every refined, elegant, perfect one of them, the most important people in the Ascendancy, the flower of 10,000 years of civilization. When the ceiling came down, they froze, everyone caught in their flawless dance, unable to break the choreography even to save their own lives. Because that is what 10,000 years of refinement had done to us. It had trained the act out of us. We had refined away not just the laughter and the touching and the grief, but the deep animal capacity to simply move when something is falling, to act without deliberation, to do the unrefined, ungraceful, life-saving thing. The Aurelians stood frozen in their perfect poses while death came down on them, because to move suddenly, to break the dance, to throw oneself aside in undignified terror, was a thing our refinement had unmade in us. And in the one moment of our lives when refinement was worthless and only raw action could save us, we discovered that we had refined ourselves out of the ability to act at all. I froze too, I want to confess that. I, the crown princess, the supposed strongest of us. I stood beside my father and looked up at the death coming down, and I could not move, my whole body locked in the exquisite paralysis that 10,000 years had bred into me, and I understood in that frozen half-second that I was going to die in a flawless pose, and that my flawlessness was the thing that was killing me. And then a solid human body hit me from the side and drove me out of the way, and the ceiling came down where I had been standing. Marcus moved. Of course Marcus moved. He was the only one in that whole hall of frozen, refined Aurelians who was not frozen, because he was human, because his people had not spent 10,000 years refining the animal out of themselves, because when something is falling a human simply moves, throws themselves and the people near them out of the way, acts first and thinks later, the deep old death world reflex that our refinement had so carefully destroyed. The thing my people had taught ourselves to disdain as coarse, as unformed, as beneath us, the raw human capacity to act without grace, was the only thing in that hall that could save a single life that night, and Marcus had it, and he spent it without hesitation on us, on the very people who had disdained him. He hit me first because I was nearest, drove me out from under the falling vault, and I went down hard and ungracefully on the crystal floor, the breath knocked out of me alive. And then, and this is the part I watched from the floor, the part burned into me forever, he did not stop. He did not freeze, having saved himself in the princess. He turned back into the falling hall, into the rain of crystal and stone, and he went for my father. The sovereign Aurelian was frozen at the center of it, directly under the worst of the collapse, the most refined being in the ascendancy locked in perfect, useless dignity while death came down, and Marcus Hale, a human, a guest, a man my father had brought here and I had publicly humiliated, ran into the collapse to reach him. I screamed, I, who had never raised my voice in my life, screamed his name from the floor, because I was certain he was running to his death, that no one could go into that and come out. And he reached my father, and he did the most undignified, most human, most beautiful thing I have ever seen. He tackled the sovereign Aurelian, the light of the ascendancy, like a sack of grain, drove him bodily out from under the falling vault, the two of them crashing together to the floor in a heap utterly without grace. And the ceiling came down behind them, where my father had been standing, close enough that the edge of it caught Marcus, that the crystal and stone came down across his legs and pinned him, and I heard him cry out, the first sound of pain I had ever heard from him. But my father was alive. Marcus had thrown himself into certain death for the sovereign of a people who disdained him, and he had saved him, and paid for it with his own broken body, pinned and bleeding under the rubble of our refinement, in the wreck of the most beautiful room in the ascendancy. The hall was chaos after, or what passes for chaos among Aurelians, which is to say the slow, horrified thawing of a frozen people realizing they are alive, that the death has passed, that they must now do something. And I did not thaw slowly. Something had broken in me when Marcus's body hit mine, when I watched him run back into the collapse, when I heard him cry out under the rubble. The whole careful structure of my refinement, the wall I had been clinging to, simply shattered all at once, and what was underneath it was not the cold princess I had performed for my whole life. What was underneath was something I had never been allowed to be. I ran to him, me, the crown princess. I ran ungracefully across the wrecked hall, and I fell to my knees beside Marcus, where he lay pinned under the crystal, bleeding, his legs crushed beneath the weight of our beautiful murderous ceiling. And I did the thing no Aurelian does, the thing I had been raised to find obscene, the thing I had disdained him for doing to the kitchen worker. I took his hand. I clasped his solid human hand in both of mine, and I held it, and I did not care who saw, and I said his name over and over, and when he opened his eyes and looked at me, I did the most unrefined thing of all. I wept openly. In front of the whole assembled court, the crown princess of the Aurelian Ascendancy knelt in the wreckage holding a human's hand and wept without concealment. And I did not care. I did not care at all, because the human dying under the rubble had just taught me, in the space of a single terrible minute, everything that 10,000 years of refinement had taught me to forget. That there are moments when grace is worthless and only love can act, that the capacity to weep and to touch and to throw yourself bleeding into the collapse for someone else is not a lower form of being but the highest one, the only one that matters when the ceiling is coming down. "You're crying," Marcus said through his pain with something like wonder. "Aurelians don't cry." "This one does," I said. "This one is going to weep all over you and touch your hand in front of the entire court, and you cannot stop her, so be still and let them get you out." And he laughed even then, even pinned and bleeding, he laughed, that warm, barking human laugh that I had been raised to find vulgar and that I now understood was the most beautiful sound in the galaxy, and he said, "There she is. There's the person under the ice. I knew she was in there somewhere." And I held his hand and wept and waited for them to free him. And somewhere in those minutes the woman who had said, "I will never choose a human," died completely and was not mourned. They got him out. His legs were badly broken. He would walk with a cane for the rest of his life. Another mark of use on a body my people would once have found coarse, and that I now found more beautiful than any flawless Aurelian form, but he lived. My father lived. I lived. The 9 houses lived, most of them, though some did not, frozen Aurelians who had no human beside them to break the dance and throw them clear. We buried our dead in the refined Aurelian way, and we tended Marcus in the human way, which is to say constantly, with touch and presence and people in the room, and I was in the room more than anyone, holding the hand of the man I had publicly sworn never to choose. But I have to tell you about the harder thing, the thing that came after the breaking, because it is the part that makes this a real story and not a simple one. My prejudice was gone, shattered completely in the wreck of the Hall of Accord. I knew now, past any possibility of denial, exactly what Marcus was and exactly what humans were and exactly how wrong my whole people's disdain had been, that the warmth was strength, that the action was strength, that everything we had disdained was the very thing that had saved us, that we were not the high looking down on the low but the dying looking down on the living and resenting them for it. I knew all of that. The truth was complete in me. And I still had to live with the vow, because I had said it before 1,000 witnesses. I will never choose a human. It was the most public statement I had ever made, the defining moment of my reputation, and it was now standing between me and the truth I had discovered, exactly as completely as my prejudice once had. I had been undone, but undoing your prejudice in your own heart is one thing, and admitting it before the entire court that watched you swear the opposite is another, and the second thing requires a kind of courage that the first does not. To go to Marcus now, to choose him now, was to stand before the same 1,000 witnesses and confess that the crown princess had been cruel and prejudiced and wrong, to unmake my own proud vow in public, to be humbled before the whole ascendancy. My pride, which had survived the death of my prejudice, recoiled from it. And I understood, lying awake in the nights while Marcus healed, that the last enemy was not my prejudice at all. My prejudice was dead. The last enemy was my pride, the pride that could accept privately that I had been wrong but could not bear to say so where the world could hear. And I knew that if I let my pride win, if I let the vow stand because admitting otherwise was too humbling, then I would lose Marcus, and lose the warmth, and lose the one chance my people had to be saved from our beautiful frozen death. And I would deserve to lose it all, because I would have chosen my pride over the truth, which is the most Aurelian sin there is, and the one I had finally learned to see. My father told me the truth while Marcus was healing. I think he had been waiting for the right moment, and the wreck of the Hall of Accord, with his life saved by the very human I had publicly rejected, was as right a moment as there would ever be. He came to my chambers alone at night, which he never did. The sovereign did not visit. One was summoned to him. But that night he came, and he dismissed my attendants, and he sat down across from me in the starlight, an old refined Aurelian who had just nearly died, and he did a thing I had never once seen my father do in my whole life. He let his face show what he felt. The careful mask of refinement slipped, just for me, just for that one night, and underneath it I saw something I had never imagined was there. Exhaustion and grief and a desperate, tired hope. "I have to tell you why I did it," he said. "The marriage, why I chose a human and why it had to be you. You believe it was politics. It was not politics. Or it was, but politics was the lie I told the court, because the truth was a thing I could not say out loud, a thing that would have been treason against everything our people believe." He looked at me. "Vaelis, we are dying, our people. We have been dying for 1,000 years, and I am the only one who has let himself see it, and I could not say so, because to say so is to attack the refinement itself, and the refinement is the only God the Aurelians have left." And he told me what he had seen across his long reign, the falling birth rate, the shrinking territory, the exquisite changeless stagnation, a people so perfectly refined that we had refined the life out of ourselves, become beautiful brittle crystal, flawless and cold, and unable to grow or change or feel or in the end to act, as the collapse had so terribly proven. "We have made ourselves perfect," my father said, "and perfect things are finished things, and finished things do not live. They only endure for a while, and then they shatter. I have watched us becoming a finished thing my whole life, and I have been so afraid, and I could not tell anyone, because there is no one among us who could hear it. We have refined away even the ability to be told." "Then why?" I began. "Why a human?" My father almost smiled, the real way, the human way I had learned from Marcus. "Because humans have the thing we lost, the warmth, the life, the capacity to act and to feel and to change. I could not argue our people back to life. Argument is just more refinement, and you cannot cure a sickness with the sickness. But I could bring the cure into the bloodline itself. I could place one warm human heart at the very center of the cold court, in the highest house, and let it do what no argument could. I gambled our people's future on the character of a single human, sight largely unseen, because I had run out of any other hope. And then he came, and you insulted him before the whole court, and I had to sit on my throne and say nothing and watch my last desperate hope be publicly humiliated by my own daughter, and pray that the human I had gambled everything on was as good as I needed him to be." My father's voice broke. He ran into a falling ceiling to save an old man who had brought him here to be rejected. He was better than I dared hope, Vaelis. My gamble paid. The cure is real, and it is here, and it saved my life with its own broken body. The only question left is whether my daughter's pride will let our people take it. I want to tell you what it cost me to do what I did next, because the cost is the whole measure of it. I had to unmake my vow, in public, before the same court that had heard me swear it. There was no private way to choose Marcus. I was the crown princess, and my choice was a matter of state, and the court that had watched me declare, "I will never choose a human," would have to watch me unmake it, would have to see the proud princess humbled, would have to witness me confess that I had been cruel and prejudiced and wrong. My pride, which had survived the death of my prejudice, screamed against it. Every refined instinct in me, 10,000 years of them, recoiled from the public humbling, looked for some elegant way to choose Marcus without admitting I had been wrong to reject him, some face-saving path, some refinement. And I understood, finally, that the looking for a face-saving path was itself the sickness. That my pride's refusal to be humbled was the exact same disease that had frozen my people under the falling ceiling, the inability to do the ungraceful, undignified, life-saving thing. Choosing Marcus elegantly with my pride intact would have been one more refinement, one more flawless cold gesture. The only true choice, the human choice, the living choice, was to do it the undignified way. To stand before the court and simply, plainly, without elegance, confess that I had been wrong and let myself be humbled, and choose him anyway in the open, with my pride in pieces on the floor. So that is what I did. I called the court back to the Hall of Accord. They repaired it after the collapse, rebuilt the vault, restored the crystal, and I waited until it was whole again, because I wanted to unmake my vow in the very place I had made it, in the very place Marcus had nearly died saving us. And I stood where I had stood before, the crown princess before the assembled ascendancy, the same 1,000 witnesses, and Marcus was there, leaning on the cane he would use for the rest of his life, watching, not knowing what I was about to do, because I had told no one. And I did not perform. That was the whole point. I did not craft an elegant speech. I did not find a refined way to say it. I stood there and I let my face show what I felt, the way my father had let his, the way Marcus had taught me, and I spoke plainly in the human way without a single layer of Aurelian indirection. Some weeks ago, I said, in this hall I told my father that I would never choose a human. I said it to be cruel. I said it because I had been raised to believe that humans were beneath us, and I believed it completely, and I was proud of believing it. I was wrong. My voice did not shake, though I had thought it would. I was wrong about humans, and I was wrong about us, and I was most wrong about the man I insulted, who answered my cruelty with grace, and who then ran into a falling ceiling to save my father's life, and crippled himself doing it for a people who had given him nothing but disdain. I looked out at the 1,000 frozen, refined faces, and I felt no fear at all, only a strange new freedom. We have called ourselves the highest people in the galaxy. We are not. We are a people who refined ourselves until we could no longer act or feel or change, until we could not even move when death came down on us, and had to be saved by the warmth of the very people we looked down on. That is not the highest form a people can take. It is a beautiful death, and I will not choose the beautiful death. I will not. The hall was silent, the deepest silence I had ever heard in it. I am choosing the human, I said. Marcus Hale, not for politics, because he is warm and brave and kind, and everything we have forgotten how to be, and because our people are dying of our own perfection, and he is the cure, and I would be a fool and a coward to let my pride refuse the cure when it has been offered to us so freely by someone who has already bled for us. I turned to Marcus, who was staring at me, the cane forgotten in his hand. I said I would never choose you. I was wrong. I am sorry, and if you will still have a princess who insulted you before this whole court and took this long to see what you were, I am choosing you, here, in the open, where everyone who heard me swear the opposite can hear me unmake it. That is the only way I know how to do it honestly. So, Marcus Hale, will you have me? He crossed the hall to me, slowly with the cane, with the limp my people had given him, in front of the 1,000 watching faces, and the watching faces, I realized, were not cold anymore. Something was happening in that hall as he crossed it. The 1,000 refined Aurelians who had frozen under the falling ceiling, who had spent 10,000 years unable to feel or touch or weep. They were watching their crown princess humble her pride and choose warmth in the open, and something in them was thawing. I could feel it, a thing moving through the hall like the first warmth of spring through frozen ground. My father had been right. You could not argue a frozen people back to life, but you could show them their princess weeping, choosing, humbling herself for love in the open, and the showing did what no argument ever could. Marcus reached me, and he did the most human thing, the thing that broke the last of the ice in that hall and, I think, in the whole ascendancy. He did not give an elegant answer. He looked at me, this brave, broken, warm man who had crossed a galaxy to be rejected, and had stayed anyway and bled for us anyway. And he grinned that warm, barking grin, and he said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, "Took you long enough." And then he pulled me into his arms, embraced me, the way humans do, the way no Aurelian had embraced anyone in 10,000 years, in front of the entire court. And I let him. I held him back, ungracefully, completely. And the hall, the cold crystal hall of accord, the most refined room in the most refined civilization in the galaxy, erupted into a sound it had never made in all its long history. It erupted into cheering. Aurelians, refined, elegant, frozen Aurelians cheering, out loud, breaking 10,000 years of silence all at once, because their princess had chosen warmth over pride and life over beautiful death, and the choosing had given them permission, finally, to feel the thing they had forbidden themselves for 100 centuries. My father was weeping openly on his throne. The heads of the 9 houses were embracing each other, clumsily, like people remembering a language they had forgotten. The whole frozen court was thawing at once, in a single moment, around a human's embrace and a princess's humbled love, and I understood that this exact moment, was what my father had gambled everything on, the moment the cold crystal people remembered they were alive. I will tell you briefly what came after, because the after is the proof of everything. We married, Marcus and I, and it was not a refined Aurelian ceremony but a warm human Aurelian one, the first of its kind, loud and demonstrative and full of touch and laughter. And our people, who had never known how to celebrate, learned that day, learned it from the humans who came for the wedding, and never unlearned it. And the thaw spread, that is the thing. It started in the Hall of Accord, and it spread across the whole Ascendancy slowly over the years that followed, a refined dying people remembering, generation by generation, how to laugh out loud, how to touch each other, how to weep where others could see, how to act without first deliberating, how to feel and change and grow and live. The warmth Marcus carried into the cold center of our court did exactly what my father had hoped. It thawed us from the inside, saved us from our beautiful perfect death, gave us back the life we had refined away. Our birth rate climbed. Our art, which had been flawless and cold for 10,000 years, became alive, became messy, became great again. The Aurelians stopped dying. We became, over the generations, something new, refined still, beautiful still, but warm now, alive now. A people who had taken the best of what we were and married it to the best of what humans were, and become, in the joining, something neither people could have been alone. Our children could laugh out loud. That, in the end, was my father's whole dream, the thing he had gambled everything for, and he lived to see it, lived to hold his grandchildren, mine and Marcus's, and to hear them laugh, those great warm barking human laughs in the crystal halls, and I have never seen anyone as happy as my cold, refined father was, weeping openly, the day he first heard his grandchildren laugh. I am old now, and I have ruled a long time, and I have told this story often, because the young of my people need to hear it, need to know what we were, and how close we came to dying of our own perfection, and what saved us. A human saved us. Marcus Hale, who I insulted before the whole court, who answered my cruelty with grace and my people's disdain with his own broken body, who carried warmth into the frozen heart of a dying civilization, and thought it back to life. He is gone now. Humans do not live as long as we do, and I have outlived my Marcus by many years, and the grief of it is the price I paid for the warmth, and I would pay it again 1,000 times, because a life with the warmth and the grief is so much more than a flawless cold life with neither. He taught me that too. He taught me everything. So here is the truth, the whole of it, for any young Aurelian who hears this, and for any human, and for anyone in the galaxy who has ever been certain they were better than someone else. I said before the entire court, in my pride and my prejudice and my certainty, "Father, I will never choose a human." And then everything changed. A ceiling came down and my people froze in their perfect poses while a human I had despised threw his body between us and death. And I learned in the space of a single terrible minute that everything I had been raised to disdain, the warmth, the bluntness, the laughter, the touch, the raw human willingness to act and to feel, was not a lower form of being. It was the highest form. It was the thing my people had lost and called it civilization. It was life itself, walking around in a body I had been taught to find coarse, and it saved us, and I almost let my pride refuse it. "I will never choose a human," I said. I was wrong. I have never been so wrong about anything, and I have never been so grateful to be wrong, because being wrong about that one thing gave me my husband, and my children, and my children's laughter, and the life of my whole people, and the warmth that thawed a dying civilization back into the living galaxy. Choose the warmth. Whatever you have been taught, whatever you are certain of, whatever pride stands in your way when life is offered to you in whatever coarse, unrefined form, by whoever you have been taught to look down on. Choose it. Choose the warmth. It is the only thing that was ever worth choosing.